It started with a silence no one dared to break. The courtroom was filled with whispers and judgment, but when the doors opened and the old biker walked in, every sound disappeared. His leather jacket was worn, his beard streaked with gray, and his eyes carried the kind of pain that only war and time could carve into a man's soul. He wasn't there to fight for glory or revenge. He was there for something far greater, justice. But standing across from him was not an ordinary man. It was Judge Harlan Pierce, the most feared, untouchable, and politically powerful figure in the entire county. Everyone believed that no one could stand against him. Until that day. The veteran's name was Jack Dalton, a man who had once served his country and later found peace on the open road among his brothers, the bikers who called themselves the Iron Saints. To most, he was a relic of the past. But when the judge wronged one of Jack's brothers, taking everything he had through lies and corruption, Jack decided that silence was no longer an option. The court was his new battlefield, and his weapon was truth. Judge Pierce smirked as Jack took the stand. To him, this was just another fool trying to challenge power. He had silenced politicians, ruined lives, and manipulated justice for years, all from behind his marble desk. But Jack wasn't there to win a case. He was there to expose the truth that everyone else was too afraid to speak. The difference was, Jack had already faced death. What could a man in a black robe possibly do to scare him now? Every eye in that room was fixed on him. The bikers filled the back rows, their leather vests catching the dim light, their silence heavy with meaning. They didn't come to intimidate. They came to bear witness. Jack's voice didn't tremble. It cut through the air like thunder. He spoke of loyalty, of sacrifice, of what it truly meant to stand for something when everything was stacked against you. And as he did, even the judge's confident smile began to fade. No one in that courtroom could have predicted what was about to unfold next. Because what Jack revealed that day would not only shatter reputations, it would ignite a fire that power could no longer control. By the time he was done, even those who once bowed to the judge's authority would rise to their feet, not in rebellion, but in respect for the man who reminded them that courage has no rank and justice fears no name. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut through. The judge's gavel struck the desk, echoing like a warning shot, but Jack Dalton didn't flinch. He had faced far louder thunder on foreign soil, under skies filled with fire. This was different, not a battle of weapons, but of will. As he stood there, his worn leather vest visible beneath his clean jacket, he wasn't just a man standing before a judge. He was a symbol of every ordinary person who'd been crushed by the arrogance of power. And deep down, everyone watching could feel it. The judge leaned back in his chair, arrogance dripping from every gesture. "You think you can walk into my courtroom and accuse me?" he said, voice heavy with scorn. Jack's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not accusing, Your Honor," he replied calmly. "I'm reminding." The words landed with the weight of truth, unsettling the crowd. The judge's face stiffened. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him as an equal. Jack wasn't there to win his own freedom. He was there to reclaim someone else's. Jack's best friend, a younger biker named Cole, had been sentenced unjustly months earlier. The judge had buried him under false charges, manipulated evidence, and silenced witnesses. Cole had served his country too, just like Jack, but unlike the powerful, he had no voice, no money, no connections. And that's what burned Jack most. Justice wasn't blind, it was bought. So, when no one else dared to stand up, Jack did what men like him had always done. He rode straight into the storm. As Jack began to speak, the courtroom transformed. Each word peeled back another layer of the truth. He spoke of documents forged, testimonies threatened, lives ruined, all under Judge Pierce's command. The man who had once been untouchable was now cornered by his own corruption. Every revelation struck the crowd like a blow, each gasp echoing through the cold marble room. Even the bailiff looked uneasy, shifting from foot to foot as Jack's voice filled the air with the one thing that power fears most, truth. By the end of that day, the judge had ordered the court adjourned early, his expression cold but shaken. He thought a delay would cool the storm, but he was wrong. Outside, the bikers waited for Jack, engines rumbling like distant thunder. He stepped out into the fading light, knowing the fight had only begun. Because when the law bends for the powerful, men like Jack rise. Not for vengeance, but for balance. And balance was exactly what he planned to restore. The next morning, the town was divided. Some called Jack reckless, others called him brave. But deep inside, everyone knew he had awakened something that had been buried for too long, a hunger for truth. Local news stations started whispering about the confrontation, and for the first time in decades, Judge Pierce's reputation began to crack. Yet power rarely surrenders quietly. Behind closed doors, the judge made his own calls, summoning allies who owed him favors. Jack had declared war, and the man he stood against didn't play fair. Back at the Iron Saints clubhouse, the atmosphere was heavy. The brothers sat around the wooden table, their leather cuts glowing under the dim light. Some warned Jack to back down. "He's not just a man, brother," one said. "He's a system." But Jack's mind was set. "Then maybe it's time the system remembered who it's meant to serve," he replied. His voice was steady, his conviction unshakable. These men had seen him lead through firefights and funerals. They knew when he spoke like that, there was no turning back. That night, an unmarked car followed him home. He noticed it in the mirror, but didn't react. He'd lived too long to be intimidated by shadows. When the car finally pulled away, he parked his bike, leaned against the wall, and smiled. "So that's how you play it, Judge," he murmured. The game had changed. Pierce wasn't just defending his reputation anymore. He was defending his empire. But Jack wasn't alone, and that's what terrified the judge most. Power can silence one man, but it struggles against a brotherhood. The next day, Jack met with a local journalist, a woman named Elise who had once been fired for investigating corruption. "You really want to go through with this?" she asked. Jack nodded. "The truth's only dangerous to those who hide from it." She smiled faintly and agreed to help. Together, they began uncovering files, testimonies, and proof that could shake the courthouse from its foundation. Every page they found told the same story. One man's greed had turned justice into a weapon. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack looked out at the open road stretching ahead. He knew what was coming: retaliation, threats, maybe worse. But there's a kind of calm that only men who've already survived death can feel. Jack had felt it before, and he felt it again now. Tomorrow, he would walk back into that courtroom, not as a defendant or a witness, but as a reminder that even the most powerful man can be brought to his knees when truth rides in with steel and courage. The next morning, the courthouse was packed to its limits. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing, microphones ready to catch every breath of what was becoming the most talked-about case in the county's history. Judge Pierce arrived flanked by guards, his face a mask of arrogance, though his eyes betrayed unease. Jack arrived minutes later. No lawyers, no entourage, just his worn jacket, the Iron Saints patch on his back, and the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to lose but his word. The crowd parted as he walked in, the roar of engines from the bikers outside echoing like a promise. He wasn't alone. When the session began, the judge's tone was sharp, almost venomous. "Mr. Dalton, this is not a stage for your theatrics," he said. Jack smiled faintly. "Then let's stop pretending justice is won." The courtroom gasped. Even the stenographer froze mid-keystroke. Jack's calm defiance wasn't disrespect. It was control. He had learned long ago that true strength doesn't shout. It stands firm in silence. And that silence, in that moment, belonged entirely to him. Elise, the journalist, sat quietly in the back row, a folder clutched against her chest. Inside it were the documents, the proof of forged signatures, hidden transfers, and sealed records that tied the judge directly to every injustice he had ruled upon. As Jack spoke, she passed the folder to a young attorney who had volunteered to represent Cole pro bono. Every word, every piece of evidence, was a nail in the coffin of corruption. Piece by piece, the illusion of the judge's power began to crumble. But power, when cornered, fights ugly. Midway through the testimony, the judge attempted to dismiss the proceedings on technical grounds, citing irrelevance. Jack's voice cut through the air like thunder. "Relevance? You stole a man's life because you thought no one would dare challenge you. Tell me, Judge, how relevant does truth need to be before you hear it?" The courtroom erupted. The bailiff tried to quiet the noise, but it was useless. The people had heard enough. The once silent spectators had found their voice, and it echoed with Jack's courage. By the time the day ended, the media had already spun the story in national headlines. Veteran biker confronts corrupt judge. But for Jack, this wasn't about fame. It was about redemption, for Cole, for himself, and for everyone who'd ever been crushed by someone who mistook authority for power. As he left the courthouse, the crowd erupted into applause, and for a brief moment, even Jack, scarred, hardened, and weary, felt something he hadn't in years: hope. That night, the storm came. Rain poured over the highway as Jack rode home, his headlights cutting through sheets of water. The cold bit into his skin, but he welcomed it. It reminded him he was alive. When he reached the edge of town, 2 cars blocked the road. Dark windows. No plates. He stopped his bike, engine rumbling low. 3 men stepped out, suits soaked, faces hidden under hats. "The judge sent his regards," one said. Jack smirked. "Tell him he should have sent more." The first punch came fast, but Jack moved faster. Years of military training turned instinct into motion. He fought not for glory, but survival. The rain turned the ground slick, boots slipping against gravel, fists echoing like thunderclaps in the storm. 1 man fell, then another, but the third landed a hit that sent Jack to his knees. Blood mixed with rain on his lips, but he didn't stay down. He rose, slow and unbroken, eyes burning with defiance. "You think I'm scared of pain," he said. "Pain built me." And with that, the fight ended, not in victory, but in warning. The message was clear. Power was losing control. Back at the clubhouse, the Iron Saints waited in tense silence. When Jack walked in, bruised but upright, the room erupted in anger. "We ride tonight," one of them growled. Jack raised a hand. "No, we ride when it matters." Revenge was easy. Justice was harder. And Jack wasn't about to stain his cause with blood. Not yet. The men lowered their heads, trusting him even when they didn't understand him. That's what leadership looked like: quiet strength, not chaos. Meanwhile, Elise published the first of her reports. The article exploded across the nation, exposing the judge's decades of corruption. Donations flooded in for Cole's defense. Petitions rose, and for the first time in years, people believed justice might still exist. The judge tried to suppress the coverage, but it was too late. The story had escaped the walls of his courtroom. Truth was now free, and once freed, it doesn't die, it spreads. Jack stood outside that night, looking at the horizon glowing faintly under the city lights. The fight was far from over, but something in the air had shifted. Power was trembling, justice was stirring, and somewhere deep inside, Jack knew the storm he'd started couldn't be stopped. Not by fear, not by force, not even by the law itself. The road ahead would be dangerous, but he'd been on dangerous roads before, and every mile had led him here. Days turned into weeks, and the town that once bowed to authority began to rise. Ordinary people, mechanics, waitresses, veterans, started speaking up. They shared stories of how the judge had twisted their lives, of fines that bankrupted them, of sentences that made no sense. The courthouse steps became a gathering place, filled not with anger, but with determination. Jack would stand there each morning, listening, never leading, just being present. His quiet strength became a symbol, a reminder that courage isn't noise, it's endurance. Meanwhile, Judge Pierce grew desperate. Behind the polished wood of his chambers, he tore through files, made late-night calls, and tried to tighten his grip on a system slipping away. His empire had thrived on fear, but now fear had shifted sides. The whispers he once commanded turned into rumors about his downfall. He could feel it. The control he built brick by brick was crumbling beneath his feet, all because of one old biker who refused to kneel. Elise's articles gained traction nationwide. Television anchors debated the case. Veterans groups rallied in support of Jack and Cole, and even retired judges began calling for an investigation. The pressure was unbearable, and the courthouse's walls, once symbols of order, now felt like prison bars closing in on the guilty. But Jack didn't celebrate. He knew the fight wasn't won in headlines. It was won in truth. And truth, he believed, had to be lived, not just spoken. One night, Cole was released on temporary appeal. When Jack saw him walk out of the county jail, his eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. The younger man hugged him tightly, whispering, "You did it, brother." Jack shook his head. "We did it." The Iron Saints surrounded them, their engines silent, their presence solemn. It wasn't triumph they felt. It was something deeper, restoration. For the first time, justice had leaned in their direction. But peace, Jack knew, never comes without consequence. A man like Judge Pierce doesn't go down quietly. Jack could feel it in his bones. The storm hadn't passed. It had only gathered strength. As he looked up at the dark sky, lightning flickering in the distance, he muttered under his breath, "If he's coming for me, I'll be ready." The road that had once led to the courthouse would soon lead somewhere darker, somewhere final. The next morning, Jack's suspicions proved right. A black SUV was parked outside his house, engine running, 2 men inside. He didn't need to see their faces to know who had sent them. But Jack didn't run. He walked straight to his bike, started the engine, and rode off, leading them away from his home, from his brothers, from everyone else who might pay the price for his defiance. The open road stretched before him like a test of faith. He wasn't just riding to escape. He was riding to confront. He led them miles out of town, down a deserted stretch of highway flanked by dying trees and empty fields. When he finally stopped, the SUV pulled up behind him. 2 men stepped out, rain-soaked and angry. "The judge wants this finished," one said, raising a gun. Jack's voice was steady, his eyes fixed. "Then tell him he should have come himself." The men hesitated. Something in Jack's stance, calm, unwavering, fearless, made them falter. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need to. He was the weapon. Suddenly, headlights cut through the darkness. One by one, motorcycles emerged from the rain, engines rumbling low. The Iron Saints had followed. The men froze as a dozen bikers formed a circle around Jack, headlights glaring, rain falling like sparks. No words were spoken. The message was clear. One man's fight had become a brotherhood stand. Justice had brothers now, and it didn't need permission to exist. The men retreated, their fear louder than their engines. Jack watched them vanish into the night, then turned to his brothers. Hawk, the oldest among them, spoke first. "You know he won't stop, Jack. Men like him don't know how." Jack nodded. "Then we make him remember." It wasn't revenge he sought. It was closure. But to end something corrupted for so long, he knew he would have to walk straight into its heart. As dawn broke, Jack stood on the edge of the highway, soaked to the bone, his reflection shimmering in the wet asphalt. The battle wasn't over, but something had shifted forever. The judge still had power, but now the people had courage. And once courage is born, it never truly dies. It multiplies. Jack had lit the match. The question now was how far the fire would spread before justice finally burned clean. By sunrise, news of the attempted ambush had spread. Elise's article exposed the intimidation tactics tied to the judge, sparking outrage across the state. What had started as one-man stand was now a movement. Veterans rode from neighboring towns to show support, lining the courthouse steps with rows of gleaming motorcycles. Engines silent, presence deafening. The image went viral. An army of bikers standing shoulder to shoulder against a corrupt system. It wasn't rebellion. It was awakening. And at its center stood Jack, unarmed but unbreakable. The judge, once untouchable, now found himself cornered. Investigators had reopened every one of his cases. Reporters crowded his mansion, demanding answers. But his arrogance refused to die easily. "These people don't know the law," he said to his aides, voice cracking under pressure. "They only know noise." Yet, when he looked out his window that morning and saw the endless line of motorcycles stretching down his street, he realized it wasn't noise. It was judgment, the kind no courtroom could escape. Back in town, Jack gathered his brothers and the townspeople at the old diner. The air buzzed with anticipation. "This isn't about revenge," he told them. "If we become what we're fighting, we lose everything." His words cut through the anger like a blade through smoke. The people nodded. They weren't there to destroy. They were there to rebuild. The kind of justice they wanted couldn't be taken. It had to be earned through truth and patience. Jack knew it was the harder road, but the only one worth riding. As the investigation deepened, more victims came forward. Each story added weight to the growing storm. A farmer whose land was stolen in a rig dispute. A widow who lost her pension through falsified rulings. One by one, their voices filled the courthouse, drowning out the lies that had ruled for years. And through it all, Jack never stopped showing up. Every hearing, every testimony, every long night standing beside those who finally found the courage to speak. He wasn't their leader. He was their anchor. One evening, Elise approached him outside the courthouse. "You know," she said, "you could have walked away a long time ago." Jack looked at her, the faint glow of sunset reflecting in his weary eyes. "I fought wars overseas, Elise. But this one's home. You don't walk away from home." His voice was soft, but it carried a strength no gavel could silence. And as the last light of day faded, it became clear this wasn't just a fight against corruption anymore. It was a fight for the soul of a town that had forgotten how to believe. The courtroom was packed again, but this time, the power had shifted. The people sat in rows, not in fear, but in unity. Cole was there too, free now, his shoulders square with pride. The judge entered last, escorted by federal marshals. The same man who once sat high above them all now stood level with the crowd he'd ruled over for years. His face was pale, his steps heavy. Justice was no longer a performance. It was a reckoning. When Jack took the stand one final time, he didn't bring rage or triumph. He brought truth, delivered with the same calm that had carried him through every storm. He spoke not just of the crimes committed, but of what they had cost, the trust of a community, the belief in fairness, the idea that justice could still be sacred. "Power," he said quietly, "means nothing if it isn't accountable. And a man who hides behind his title isn't protecting the law, he's betraying it." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge couldn't meet his gaze. As Elise's camera captured every word, the world watched. What they saw wasn't just one man standing up to corruption. It was a nation reminded that integrity still had a voice. When Jack stepped down from the stand, the crowd rose to their feet. No applause, just silence, the kind that carries more meaning than any cheer ever could. It was respect, raw, unspoken, and earned. The verdict came days later. Guilty on all counts. The once feared Judge Pierce was stripped of his title, his wealth, and his influence. When the news broke, the town didn't celebrate with noise or parades. Instead, they gathered quietly at the Veterans Memorial, the same place where Jack had stood alone years ago. They laid flowers, said prayers, and remembered that justice, though slow, had finally arrived. That night, Jack rode alone through the desert highway, the stars above him endless. The road stretched far ahead, whispering like an old friend. He didn't ride for glory. He rode for peace, the kind that only comes when the fight is finally over. Yet somewhere deep down, he knew that men like him never stop fighting completely, because the world will always need reminders that courage doesn't wear robes and truth doesn't need permission to speak. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that trial lingered like a storm that refused to fade. The courthouse stood quieter now, its marble halls no longer symbols of fear, but of change. People began to walk those corridors differently, heads high, eyes forward. Even those who once felt invisible started to believe that their voices mattered. And in every whispered thank you, every nod of respect, Jack's name carried the weight of something far greater than rebellion. It carried restoration. Cole, now free and rebuilding his life, often visited Jack at the garage where the Iron Saints gathered. "You could have walked away, brother," he said one night, handing Jack a cup of coffee. Jack smirked. "Yeah," he said, "but then I wouldn't sleep as good." They both laughed, but behind that laughter was the kind of peace that only comes after chaos. The road had tested them, broken them, and yet somehow it had remade them stronger than before. They weren't heroes. They were proof that decency still had power. Elise's documentary aired a month later, titled "The Veteran Who Defied Power." It became a nationwide phenomenon. People saw in Jack what they had lost faith in: moral courage, the kind that doesn't seek cameras or applause. Messages poured in from across the country. Letters from soldiers, single mothers, workers, and teachers, all thanking him for reminding them that integrity could still stand tall in a world that often kneels to corruption. Jack read each letter carefully, humbled, never forgetting that his fight had started for one man's freedom not fame. But fame, unwanted as it was, followed him. Politicians called, talk shows invited him, but Jack declined them all. "I'm not here to talk," he told Elise one day. "I'm here to live." She smiled. "You know, most men who do what you did would want the spotlight." Jack shook his head, eyes distant. "The spotlight burns, Elise. I've had enough fire for one lifetime." It wasn't humility that drove him away from fame. It was truth. He didn't fight for recognition. He fought because it was right. Still, life had its way of testing conviction. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the garage. It was from a small town hundreds of miles away. Their local judge, another man of influence, had begun exploiting the law, silencing veterans, and stealing land from the poor. Beneath the signature were 6 simple words: "We could use a man like you." Jack stared at the letter for a long time, the rumble of distant thunder rolling across the horizon. Maybe peace wasn't meant for men like him. Maybe his road wasn't done yet. That evening, the Iron Saints gathered under the flickering neon of their old clubhouse sign. Jack read the letter aloud, the room heavy with thought. Silence followed. Then Hawk, the oldest and most loyal of them, spoke first. "You riding out again?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He looked around at his brothers, men who had followed him through storms both literal and moral, men who had risked everything for justice they could barely afford to believe in. "Not riding away," Jack finally said. "Riding toward." The next morning, they set out before dawn. The engines roared to life one by one, their sound rolling through the valley like thunder, announcing a new storm. Locals came out to watch as the line of motorcycles disappeared into the mist. Some waved, some wept, but everyone understood what it meant. The road ahead belonged to those willing to protect it. And Jack, scarred, weary, but unbroken, was one of the few still willing to ride it. As the miles passed beneath their tires, the horizon opened up like a promise. Jack led the formation, the wind tugging at his jacket, the sun rising slowly behind him. He thought of the judge, of Cole, of the town they had saved. But most of all, he thought of what Hawk had told him once. "The world doesn't need perfect men, Jack. It needs good ones who refuse to stay quiet." He carried those words like a prayer, the kind that doesn't fade even when the engines fall silent. By midday, they stopped at a ridge overlooking a long stretch of empty road. Jack removed his gloves and let the wind whip through his hair. Down below, the land stretched endlessly, wild, unpredictable, and alive. "It never ends, does it?" Cole asked. Jack smiled faintly. "That's the point," he said. "Justice isn't a place. It's a ride." The others nodded, engines still idling, heart steady. The storm had passed, but the road was calling again. When they finally rode off, dust rose behind them like a ghost of everything they'd endured. The world would forget names, headlines would fade, but legends lived differently. And Jack Dalton, the veteran biker who stood against power, would ride on, not as a rebel, not as a hero, but as a reminder that the courage to stand up, even once, can echo far beyond the roar of engines. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the kind of road that doesn't promise peace, only purpose. Jack Dalton rode into the horizon, his figure fading against the burning sky, leaving behind a town forever changed. He hadn't won through violence or vengeance, but through something far rarer: integrity. The same man who once walked into a courtroom alone had awakened an entire community to stand beside him. And though his name might fade with time, the echo of what he stood for would remain. A reminder that truth, once spoken with courage, can never be silenced. The story of the veteran biker, of the powerful judge, wasn't just about corruption and justice. It was about the cost of standing alone when everyone else chooses to stay silent. Jack taught that bravery isn't born in battlefields. It's born in ordinary hearts that refuse to bow to fear. His journey proved that strength isn't measured by power or position, but by the willingness to protect what's right, even when it means losing everything else. He became a voice for those who had forgotten they had one. As time passed, the courthouse regained its silence, but it was no longer the silence of oppression. It was the silence of respect. The people who once avoided those marble halls now walked them with pride, knowing that justice belonged to them again. And somewhere, far down the highway, The low rumble of motorcycle engines would sometimes echo in the distance, reminding them that freedom doesn't come from authority. It comes from those who dare to defend it. Jack's legacy was never about glory. It was about awakening. He showed that even in a world drenched in corruption, one honest man can still turn the tide. His ride wasn't a rebellion. It was a redemption. And for everyone who ever felt powerless or unseen, his story became proof that one voice, one act of defiance, can break chains that have held for decades. Because in the end, the greatest revolutions don't start with armies. They start with truth. If this story touched you, let it ride with you a little longer. Maybe you've faced your own version of silence, your own battle between fear and conviction. Remember Jack's lesson. You don't need power to make a difference, just courage to take the first step. So, share your thoughts below, subscribe to the channel, and keep walking, or riding, your road with purpose. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to stand up for everyone else to finally rise.